I'm Mike, and I used to be in the exact same situation as you. You know, changes all around, inside and out, are confusing. And you may want to find a trusted adult to talk to about these new and wonderful experiences your life is about to contain. Maybe a parent or a math teacher. But just remember, these changes are totally normal, and everyone goes through them at their own pace. These changes in a person's everyday life are most commonly known as trigonometry, or Trig for short. In this video, we hope to show you just what trigonometry is, how it can affect you, and some simple lifestyle changes you can make to help deal with trigonometric problems. In class and on your homework, you should have begun to notice new words and symbols such as sine, cosine, tangent, cotangent, secant, cosecant. You might think to yourself, what are these words? Isn't math about numbers? Well, these letters are just instructions with what to do with the numbers afterwards, much like addition or subtraction.
Just what do you do when you see these words? To answer that, we need to look at the source of all these symbols, a little something we call the Pythagorean gland. Imagine a triangle. One of the angles inside the triangle is 90 degrees, making it a right triangle. The side opposite this 90-degree angle is going to be called the hypotenuse, and the other two will just be labeled A and B. The hypotenuse we'll call C. Did you know that if you take the length of A, square it, and add it to the length of B squared, you'll get the length of C squared? That's the Pythagorean gland in a nutshell. Now let's look at sine, cosine, and tangent. Choose any angle in the triangle. We'll call it X. Sine is equal to the length of the side opposite of X over the hypotenuse, or the longest side in the triangle. Cosine is equal to the length of the side adjacent to X over the hypotenuse, while tangent is sine over cosine, or the opposite side over the adjacent side. Cosecant, secant, and cotangent are pretty simple. Cosecant is simply 1 over sine, secant is 1 over cosine, and cotangent is 1 over tangent. As you go through this phase, you'll find yourself wanting to begin to try new things, and perhaps experiment in ways you haven't before. Well, you're going to start putting things together, and it's good to know what you're getting yourself into. Let's say, for example, you take sine squared and stick it with a cosine squared. You're going to end up with 1. Or maybe, if you're into a little bit stranger stuff, tangent squared plus 1 will give you secant squared. And now for those of you out there who have already experienced these wonderful things earlier in your life, you can always try 1 plus cotangent squared, which will give you cosecant squared.
Many adolescent men have trouble with what are known as double-angle identities. A great friend of mine, Harold, has a story to tell, just like many that you might be experiencing right now. Harold?
Thanks, Mike. Well, the first time I decided to try double angles, I was really ashamed because I wasn't aware of how normal it was. I just heard about it at school, and I decided to try it out. So I snuck into my room after school one day as quietly as I could. I didn't want to get caught because I didn't know what my parents would think. So in the room, I quietly shut the door, and I snuck over and began to unzip my backpack. So I was looking through, and I was able to finally find the goods. I was really prepared to start, but then I realized I was forgetting something. I ran over, and I went over to get my pencil. When I got it, I finally began to start. I first started with the double angle sine 2 theta. Through some help of my friends, and remembering what they were telling me about, I translated it to 2 sine theta times cosine theta. And then I got to the really exciting part, cosine 2 theta. That one's my favorite because it has 3 ways to be translated. First, it can become cosine squared theta minus sine squared theta. And then I decided to go all the way. So I also did 2 cosine squared theta minus 1, and then finally 1 minus 2 sine squared theta. Finally, to top it off, I went to tangent 2 theta, and then after some very, very strong struggles, I got 2 tangent theta divided by 1 minus tan squared theta. And at the end, I only had what came out of it.
Thank you very much for sharing, Harold.
Ladies, you may have found yourselves uncomfortable or even a little bit embarrassed of something that we call half angles. Don't worry, other girls have half angles too. That's why we've brought in my friend, Linda Sue, to explain a little bit more about half angles.
Thank you. When I just started Trig, I was struggling with even half angles. All the other girls in my class had already continued on to double angles and even triple angles.
Triple?
Mm-hmm. My confidence was at a rock bottom. I didn't know where to turn. Luckily, my math teacher gave me a handy pamphlet, very informative, about half angles in gear. In this pamphlet, it gave us all the equations for half angles for all the straight functions.
Why don't you share a little bit of what you learned?
Well, sine of theta over 2 is simply plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine theta all over 2. And cosine theta over 2 is exactly like sine of theta over 2, except that under the square root, it's 1 plus cosine theta over 2. And tangent theta over 2 is simply sine of theta over 2 over cosine theta over 2, giving you plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine theta over 1 plus cosine theta.
Wow. You know, it looks like you've learned to lead a normal life despite your half angles.
I have. And I've also learned that it doesn't matter how many angles you have, because we all work to different degrees in our own ways.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us as we covered so many twists and turns and identities that your life is about to take on, including half angles, double angles, and even some stuff we get from circles. Join us next week as we cover the dangers of drinking and deriving, teach you never to use crystal math, and most importantly, always have a rubber handy.